So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I'm honored to take this opportunity to welcome you all to the penultimate session for the conference, the second International Legal and Policy Conference on the Future of Transport, which basically deals around the fall or rise of the transport sector. The session goes by the name The Future of Urban Mobility, Consumer Behavior, and Travel Choices. Through this session, we shall outline how the consumers can make a more appropriate and selective choices with respect to their travel. Before we move on to the session, I take the opportunity to introduce our esteemed panelists to the attendees. Firstly, we have Mr. Dolan Shekhar from Hero Motorcorp. Next, we have Mr. Ravi Gadepalli, Transit Policy, Planning and Operations. Next, we have Mr. Roshan Toshniwal, OLA Mobility Institute. And then we have Mr. Ganesh Kolegar from Swiggy. And for the moderator for the day, we have Mr. Rajaram Suryanarayanan from MFOA Strategic Consultants. It's an honor to have you all on board, sir, and I'm extremely honored to be doing the honors. So to kickstart the session, I shall now hand it over to the moderator for the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karthik. Gives me immense pleasure to be part of this esteemed panel. When Sagar gave me the opportunity, I didn't think twice, and I grabbed the opportunity with both my hands, not literally, but figuratively. But really happy to set the agenda for the day. We're looking at how urban mobility has evolved since the pandemic has struck. I was there for the first edition of the conference physically, and perhaps that was the latest flight that I took. That was in Feb of 2020. So personally, it's been a challenge. And but again, like everybody else, we've been pivoting to the digital world. There has been a lot of digital transformation, but we're excited to know what's happening with regard to urban mobility. So we're going to start with the first speaker. So thank you very much, and I'm not going to take any more time.
Rajana?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to go ahead with the order. The first speaker is going to be Roshan. Roshan, over to you. Really looking forward to a very insightful session from all of you.
Thanks, Rajana.
And in the meanwhile, I had some questions to Roshan.
Yeah, sure.
Interesting to see that you're working from office. You deal largely with future of work as well. In fact, I think Dolan is also at office, physical office. So how's it been? I think I've been working out of my office, and it's just today that I'm working from home. But it's been interesting for me, but I wanted to know your thoughts as well.
No, I think it's a good strike balance. So I've been actually working from office from the time pandemic has begun. So it's not like, it's any different. I was before this, I was with Ernst & Young, and I was working with the government strategy at Pune, and we were primarily because it was a sector that was responsible for transportation, right? With the public transport entity, so we were in office all the time. So I mean, I don't see any big difference between the two. But people who've worked from home, most of the time probably will be able to provide a little more insight on how it was.
Thank you. I think you're as far as my experience is considered with regard to work from home, I would request some insights from the rest of the panelists as well. I've seen a sea change in the attitude that people have towards urban mobility. For instance, I have pivoted to I am a big time user of public transportation, but I've moved on to personal mobility now. So yeah, that's been a big change from my side.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the businesses specifically, all the digital businesses that are on delivery have done fairly well during this time.
Yeah.
Literally sort of gave us a role that you don't require to get out of your house. And that caused, certainly that has affected, all transport businesses overall. But so be it. Should I begin, or Dolan, you want to probably come in and explain the experience briefly?
Experience has been mixed, to be very honest. Like, there's nothing like being home with family, but to be honest, let's face it, we are more productive at workplaces, I suppose. At least I feel that way. When your peer groups are around you, you tend to, and frankly, VCs are kind of getting out of the hand at times. A 10-minute talk kind of extends to an hour just because we are virtually available. But having said that, there is a balance that needs to be struck. I think we have already found it now. But yeah, kind of resonate with you on that, Roshan. Like,
Thanks.
yes.
So, if you're with your permission, Rajaram, should I begin?
Please, yeah.
Just setting the context here, I would briefly talk about the overall ambit of legislation in the transportation sector, specifically to be urban transport. Also give you snippets of some interesting snippets about how things have evolved also. I mean, we won't call it obsolete and in terms of the regulation that exists, but you can see that it is continuously evolving overall. So next slide, please. I'll just quickly, briefly explain about what Ola Mobility Institute is all about. So we at Ola Mobility Institute are completely funded by ANI Technology, which is our parent company, which has 3 or 4 divisions, as you know. The Ola cabs being the most popular one. You have the Ola electric scooters that have come recently. That's the second company. The third company is called Ola Foods. Probably you would have heard about that. We have a cloud kitchen, and under these, besides these 3 companies, we are in the process of becoming a Section 8 company as Ola Mobility Institute, and then there is Ola Foundation as well. So at Ola Mobility Institute, we were primarily focused on the future of mobility in general. We're looking at, or rather have sort of programmed ourselves under these 5 divisions: electric mobility, urban mobility, energy, and mobility. Energy, as in we are looking at more of, what are the future of future fuels to, what are the other opportunities that exist, and how you could efficiently manage mobility in this process. One area, and we sort of deep dived into it, is accessibility and inclusion, which is sort of spoken less in the whole gamut of things. When we say accessibility and inclusion, we're primarily looking at gender, we're primarily looking at the vulnerable road users and the disabled people. And then we have the future of work in platform economy, Ola being one of the biggest platforms for ride hailing. And there is always this thing about what's happening in the platformization, how it is sort of changing the dichotomy of work, from formal and informal to creating new definition called gig worker, platform worker. So I think that's also again an evolving definition of work, and that's again an area that we've found is interesting. Next slide, please. So when we are looking at the various institutions and instruments that are governing urban transportation in India, urban local body or municipal corporations primarily being biggest stakeholder, have different roles to play. Under the Bombay Provincial Municipal Corporation Act, the municipal corporation was even entitled to run public transportation within the city premises. You can predominantly see this in states of Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Madhya Pradesh, while other states down south, the 5 southern states, have a parastatal entity, which you could you call it the SRTUs, the state road transport undertakings, which primarily run that. Besides that, the urban local body also takes care of the non-motorized transportation. When I say non-motorized transport, primarily you would see the cycle rickshaws, and which are now sort of redundant, or the electric motor vehicles, electric vehicles which are under the 25 kilo or 250 kilowatt or lesser, and running at a speed of less than 25 kilometers per hour. So the ULU bikes that you see are primarily, doesn't require licensing, but falls under the ambit of the municipal corporation to get the registration done. Parking, road infrastructure, again managed by the urban local body. Traffic police, as we know, are the implementation or the the agency that sort of does the enforcement. So it is given teeth under the Motor Vehicle Act, amended act, sort of also harps so much on road safety. As you see, it was the earlier Motor Vehicle Act was 1988. Then there were a few changes that happened over the course of time. Now we call it the Motor Vehicle Amendment Act in 2019. Again, the State Transport Authority also plays a huge role in the whole licensing, permits, and taxation that they collect. You could look at, under that, there are sub rules that they create, whether it is for the bike taxi rules, aggregator rules, or even the road safety policies that they've created under that whole ambit. And then we have, of course, the public transport. Now, you'll be surprised to know, and it's pretty interesting also, that, that until 2009, Metro could not really span beyond the municipal corporation limits, because, it is a railroad entity. While, as per the Railway Act, they had all the rights to sort of do the transportation beyond the municipal corporation limits. So, that got amended in 2009. And then thereafter, you had, Metro springing all over the place, in Delhi and in Bangalore and other places. Then Road Transport Corporation Act 1950 sort of clearly defined that, they create a separate entity and separate, act for the road transport system, because after all, 75% of the public transportation trips are being made on, buses. And then, even in course of pollution and the kind of fuel that is being used, this is again prevalent, as especially in bikes. You have to sort of do a PCU, pollution under control, PUC certificate every 6 months. So and then I think for cars it is 9 months. So you have that constant thing. Again, with electric vehicle coming in, whether that particular element continues to be there or not would be a question mark. Again, when you have transportation, you have people who are working in that transportation sector. So you had creations of, Motor Transport Workers Act 1961, which sort of defined that, what are the workers' rights going to be, what will be the welfare around it. And then that got upgraded again in 2020, called Code on Social Security Act, when they the government recognize the gig workers and the platform workers who are, in that whole process of delivery and transportation in this whole process. And then, the Automotive Research Association of India, what we call it as RI, they create standards, right? AIS standards, automotive industry standards. They do homologation of vehicles, and new vehicles that are coming up in, due to the electric vehicle revolution. Again, their whole, this particular institutes actually fall under the Ministry of Heavy Industry and Enterprise. And here you can sort of see that, it's a juxtaposition of so many ministries, 5-6 ministries automatically, right? From Ministry of Road Transport and Highways, to Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, to the Labor Ministry, to the Ministry of Heavy Industry and Enterprise, to the Ministry of Environment and Forest. So there's so many ministries and so many acts, coming into play to sort of look at how urban transport would be governed. Next slide, please. Here we wanted to just briefly talk about, often we see the future of mobility to be the autonomous, electrical, connected, and, shared. That's what we sort of conceive it as, so they call it in a short form CASE, CASE, for connected, autonomous, electric, and shared. Shared and electric. And this whole thing would work only when, it is sort of digital. You have that whole digital revolution, which sort of will take the future of mobility forward. So next slide, please. Just wanted to highlight this bit. Just, how important data is now. you heard that National Data Sharing and Accessibility Policy was created in 2012. And before that, we had the RTI Act. Now, considering that we are already 15, 16 years into RTI Act, and RTI is lagging so much and so much more behind, when we see that none of these policies or acts sort of mandates data collection. It just sort of says that, whatever data you have, you try and share it. So often what happens is, whose responsibility it is to collect data. But I'll just not go into the detail of the whole act and, the requirement for a new, regulation and act, but just talk about, what are the various data that could be collected, its use, and, how it is governed, accountability around it. So as we know, vehicle tracking data is a key today for transportation logistics sector specifically. It helps, commuters to know the estimated time of arrival, helps in improving reliability of the vehicle, so, and it also sort of is a trigger to create the mobility as a service in general, holistically. When you look at CCTV camera, of course, it's primarily used for surveillance, but it also sort of detects the flow of traffic at intersection and nodes, and you can utilize that data to sort of build future infrastructure if you know that road connectivity, road network is improper, or if the throughput is sort of less in that process, could actually investigate what the reasons are. And often what happens is traffic police collects this data, and it sort of is not integrated to the overall data that is required to run the city in general. Running a company, we require so much data. Remember that, running a city, you naturally require a lot more data to sort of work around. Automatic fare collection system, again, not taking individual people, but if you are able to sort of aggregate data of where people are boarding and where people are alighting, the first and last mile connectivity could be bridged more properly, because you would have these service providers who do the first and last mile connectivity to sort of put their vehicles appropriately, or put the services accordingly. Again, payment systems also, digital payments. Now you'll be surprised that 8 out of 10 apps today use geolocations, right? So the geospatial data that is sort of imbibed into the system. So it's just grown as an industry. Telematics, again, to improve safety, to improve overall movement, is a key to it. And of course, infrastructure data, as we are seeing, nobody has time to wait, right? Like, we've seen that they prefer that if you have everything on an app and you can book it, it's better that way. So same thing goes with charging infrastructure, parking, so that sort of helps people to sort of use and imbibe that thing in the whole process. Again, I'll not get into the governance and accountability bit of it. You can, as you can see it from my slide. Next slide, please. I think what remains to be seen, and we've been trying this, for, I don't know, I think since 2008, I've been seeing that, you created an act for Unified Metropolitan Transport Authority, some sort of statutory bodies created, across different cities. But the complexity of governance in urban transportation is huge, even with the 73rd, 74th Constitution Amendment Act, wherein, you sort of divulge those powers to the third tier of the government, it's truly never done. Even the BMLTA Act that is in the legislation, or rather it's in the, as the Legislative Assembly is in session today, they are in that process of wanting to pass that out. That act also sort of holds the chief minister of the state to be the chairman of that BMLTA, which is a city entity. So, rather than the case where you see London and other places where the mayor sort of becomes the chair of the particular UMTA. Then the Motor Vehicle Act doesn't presently include, autonomous vehicle norms, sort of, to have fully autonomous vehicle, you still require amendments. So I'm just saying that regulation is probably a step behind the technology that is happening, and somehow will always constantly be needed to, upgrade. Even in the urban logistics sector, I'm just saying that day before yesterday, I had a word with the Delhi transport department, and they were also suggesting that we want all the organizations to go electric, the public service vehicles to go electric. Already they are on CNG, which are a cleaner source of fuel. But all the onus of having clean vehicle falls on the public transport services and public service vehicles. So this is been a challenge. And as you see, the advanced air mobility, it's created so much of breaks, with drones coming in, government pushing on, air taxis, and this whole sector as a whole is evolving constantly. So this being up, when we talk about open data, specifically each organization adopting an open data policy, we don't have like a comprehensive open data policy for open transportation yet, right? So that's an opportunity that I think will streamline data governance, will streamline how it is to be used and analyzed, and overall what kind of standards and infrastructure could be framed around it. So that's an area again. And again, future of fuel, you heard Mr. Gadkari announcing yesterday that we should have flexible fuel vehicles. So as you heard him right on this, this is again an evolving technology. We've come this far, when it looks at electric. Back in 1908, before Model T came into being, or rather started being manufactured at scale, you had like 35% of the vehicles on America's road as electric. But again, it went down, and again it's coming up. So I think that's the constant need of upgrading the governance and regulation structure in urban transportation in India. I'll close my presentation with that. Thank you. Thanks, Rajan.
Thank you, Roshan. Very informative. So we're moving to, we'll take questions after all the speakers have spoken. So sort of setting that for now. We're moving to Ravi now. Can we have Mr. Ravi, please?
Yeah, hello. Thank you. Thanks also to Roshan for setting the context nicely, giving the large overview. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me here. I'm Ravi Gadepalli. I'm an independent consultant. I've been working for the past 13-14 years in the urban mobility space. For the past 4 or 5 years, I'm focusing more on public transport. And I work with UITP, the International Association of Public Transport, and the World Bank as a consultant predominantly. Today, I'd like to focus more on public transport. Roshan spoke about the larger mobility context, the governance, the legislation, the fuel technology, data technology, all the technologies. So, but I just focus on public transport primarily because that is the mobility source for the masses, and that is the one sector that needs significant investment and priority focus. So why do we need to focus on public transport? Primarily because majority of our population is dependent on it. In fact, majority are actually walking in India. But apart from after walking, the most used mode is public transport, and that too bus-based public transport. But despite a lot of people depending on it, why are people depending on it? Primarily because our vehicle ownership rates are still low, and even in urban areas, we have about 200 two-wheelers per 1,000 people, which means at least a maximum of a household having a vehicle on average, or less than that in most cases. The richer cities have so many vehicles. So, and every household has 4 or 5 people and only one vehicle. So that means the rest of the household is still dependent on other modes of transport, and we need public transport for everybody, rich, poor, everybody. And when we say public transport, metro rail systems are quite expensive despite the political interest. And so buses are the only feasible way to actually move a lot of people at a low cost. And also, but at the same time, when we look at our public transport systems, they are on consistent decline. So in some cities like Bangalore, at least they are at the same level. But because the population itself is increasing and the economic activity increases, which means more women are working, which means more people are making more trips for shopping malls or whatever. There is more economic activity, more travel happening, but we don't have a public mode. So people are forced to either use their own vehicle or use private shared mobility like a cab or auto rickshaw or other modes. So, but why is that cities don't have good public transport? It's primarily a funding issue, but funding is a matter of policy and governance. Our current policies are basically reactive. So on one hand, there is more disposable income in the hands of people because overall our GDP grows. So people want to buy vehicles, which means there is more traffic, and so governments are reacting to that by building more roads, and it's a vicious cycle that we are consistently trying to come out of, which we haven't done. So primarily it is a policy issue that at a political level they need to decide that public transport is a way to actually move all our people. It's not just like Germany or a US where we say, okay, 600 vehicles per thousand are also okay. Because our population density is so high. Even Latin America doesn't have so much. We have 20,000, 25,000 people per square kilometer, which means that it is just practically impossible to move everybody on private vehicles, electric or diesel or petrol, doesn't matter. So we need to decide at a political level that we need to promote public transport. And that needs to translate to actual money to improve public transport. So why do we need more money to improve public transport? It's because it is an affordable mode, and so you can't make it more expensive and so exclude people out of the system. So you need to provide a certain amount of subsidy. But many of you may be surprised to know that public transport actually is taxed more. Roshan has actually done this really nice paper in his previous avatar, actually 2 avatars back maybe, where it is clearly shown that public transport in India is actually taxed more. So on one hand, people are cramming themselves into limited space, and on top you are actually taxing them instead of facilitating them. So that's our current perverse policy perspective right now. So we need to drastically change taxation, fare setting, funding, everything. But how will that come about? On one hand, first people need to decide that we need this, but from decision to actual execution, you need a lot of things to come together. So one of the things is the regulation itself, because we have a lot of audience focused on the legislative part of the whole decision-making process. So what are the legislations governing transport or road-based public transport? The most important one is the Motor Vehicles Act, but that only recognizes public transport. It doesn't actively promote public transport. So what some of the more developed countries like the European countries or Australia, New Zealand, UK, all these countries, what they do is they have something known as a public transport service obligation. So as a government, the government decides that this is the minimum level of service we need to provide to the people. And then there is a separate operator who will actually deliver the service, which we already have. So in India, we already have, every city has some bus company. It may be BST in Mumbai, TSRTC in Hyderabad, BMTC in Bangalore, DTC in Delhi. So we have an operator, but they are struggling for lack of funds because government doesn't recognize the need for their fund. We have a discretionary funding mechanism. What we need is a consistent funding mechanism. So for that, this public transport service obligation is a key legislation we need to bring into place, which actually defines the service level, and whatever is the viability gap for the operator, it will be provided by the government, and that is reviewed at the annual level, at least, or more. So that's a big area of improvement we need. The second point I wanted to talk about is the COVID impact on transport. We were discussing earlier how COVID has changed the few of the panelists' travel behavior. But when we look at the overall city's travel behavior in general, what we see is that COVID doesn't just impact travel behavior, it has impacted the economy as a whole. So a lot of people have lost their jobs or have have gotten reduced incomes now post-COVID because the offices were not paying as much or whatever. So in fact, our economy went back by 3-4 years. And so people have lesser money to buy vehicles or use private shared mobility. So in fact, there is more demand for public transport now than it was before. So all the developed countries' logic that people don't prefer public transport anymore is not true at a societal level in India. It is true for a few of us who can afford it, who can afford to work from home, but majority of India actually needs more public transport now post-COVID. But if you look at how public transport agencies are managing post-COVID, because there was 1.5 years of subdued demand, not because people are scared of public transport, it's just that there were lockdowns. They're not even supposed to go out, or a lot of offices have shut down, or so because of all these different reasons, the overall travel activity itself has reduced. So as the overall economic activity improves, the travel activity will also improve, and then we have more people dependent on public transport. So we need actually more focus on public transport now more than before. The other point is that on the other hand, the private operators struggle for finances through this period, even the government operators. But the private operators have contracts. That's another area of work for the legal friends here who are working on the legislative angles. That how are cities contracting out public transport? On one hand, the bus agency needs a contract or the obligation from the government. They are also contracting out or outsourcing some of the operations. So in those cases, a lot of them have invoked this thing called as a force majeure clause, where either of the parties has to bear its own expense, basically. So in that context, because a public operator, any operator, majority of the cost is operational expenditure. There is some capex for buses. It's not more than 20%. Majority is operational expense, which is diesel and staff cost. But staff have to be on the rolls despite the pandemic. Otherwise, we can't suddenly get bus operators. It's a very limited resource, actually, bus drivers in India. So, so they had to service their expenses, but there was no money coming in. So, just on the contractual aspect of how to, not just COVID, any future pandemic, or we are actually, because of the climate change, we have many more floods coming through. There are many more disruptions to our operations these days than they were before. So how do we make our contracts tight enough that despite all these disruptions, we keep the system rolling? So that's a big area of work that still needs to be focused upon. And the last item I want to focus is on the financing, the international financing angle, where the World Bank, ADB, all these big financing entities, they fund a lot of metro projects, but not bus projects, primarily because it is a OPEX intensive business. So as an investor, a majority of these are focused on capital investments. I build a metro in 5 years and I'm out of it, and then I get repaid later. Whereas a bus, for the entire lifespan of the bus, you need operational expenditure, which is the majority. So attracting international finance, and one of the big financing entities, KFW, in fact says that the key constraint is that we are not able to make watertight projects. So once you design a good project, only then financing will flow. So the lack of capacity for that is actually a key drawback in our conditions right now. So for the participants here, I'd encourage you to focus more on the transport and public transport and bus sector, and there's lots to do in this space. So I'd invite you all to work in this space also. Thank you. Back to Mr. Rajan.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi. Very fascinating to understand how large sections of people are moving. Very critical and very important for reviving the economy. So over to Dolan from Hero Mobility.
Thank you, everyone. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with such esteemed, panelist and moderator. First of all, I would like to resonate with what Ravi and Roshan told a while back. India has one of the lowest ownership of vehicles in the world, at about 172 vehicles per 1,000 people, if I'm not wrong. And only 18% of the Indian population has accessibility to personal mobility, right? And your public transportation, like Ravi pointed out, is less than 10% penetration in the population. So that's a huge gap in the urban mobility space that needs to be filled up. And that has to be done through technology, because that's the space where we are heading out to. And that has to be done through indigenous ride sharing platforms, right? Like what Olo has done in the cab segment. I would be specifically talking about the two-wheeler sharing industry, because that's where I come from, and I see a lot of potential per se in that particular space. Uh, uh, if somebody can share the presentation that I've shared earlier, that's okay. Else, I believe I can share
yeah.
that. Hold on.
Yeah, Tariq would be sharing it. Tariq, if you could please share the presentation.
Sure, sure.
So, while the presentation is being shared, I come from the two-wheeler ride-sharing background, and I've been actively involved in electrification of the ride-sharing platforms, which has been happening in India. So I would just take a little bit of time to introduce where I'm currently working at. That is HMCL, which is Hero MotoCorp Limited. And we are the largest bike manufacturers in the world. In that particular company, we have our innovation cell, which has come up very recently. And here we make, so next slide, please. I think the slide is already here. Right, so I'll just walk you through a little bit about the concept that we are working on currently at the innovation cell here, called Fredo. Fredo is the mobility arm of Hero MotoCorp, where we develop new age mobility solutions for the masses. Here we have developed a lot of IoT solutions where which gives us a plethora of data and functionality as such as keyless operations of IC engine vehicles, data monetization through driver behavior, and etc. And this we have kind of made for both IC engine vehicle and for EVs as well. Also, what we have developed is ride-sharing platforms, which requires fleet management solutions and inventory management solutions for it to run in the ecosystem. And this is specially curated for the mobility as a service and last mile delivery organizations, right? And currently we are active in Uttar Pradesh. We were the first and the largest rental provider there. We are providing vehicles on rent on a long-term basis, which kind of comes from a day, goes up to 6 months as well. Now next slide, please. We'll talk a little bit about what mobility as a service means and what last mile delivery kind of consists of in the two-wheeler industry. So it's surprising that 30% of the two-wheelers are directly or indirectly used for commercial activities, be it in the last mile delivery segment or bike taxi, or be it a sales and marketing job as well, but it's used commercially one way or the other, right? So organized bike taxis, ride-sharing platforms like Bounce, Bogo, Yulu gained a lot of traction in the early 2019s till early 2020, until the pandemic kind of shut it down completely. But surprisingly, the startups are very agile, and they pivoted to the last mile delivery, and they became a 3PL players for most of the companies out there, and it's working out beautifully for them. A few of them stuck on to that core, and now their core is last mile delivery, and they have moved out from the ride sharing platform. But the fact of the matter remains, what they are leveraging is that particular two-wheeler. So that's the kind of ecosystem that that is being built around one asset, that is two-wheeler, and we are able to achieve a bike taxi platform. We are able to rent it out. We are able to do a last mile delivery. So that's the kind of impact a two-wheeler will bring in. Companies with increase in demand for shorter wait time, two-wheelers are the key component which is going to do this 10-minute delivery per se that companies have come up with. So that's where two-wheelers are going to make a greater impact at a larger scale, because the wait time for a lot of things are reduced, and electrification is going to be a key component. Having said that, it can be electric vehicle in general needs a certain ecosystem in place for it to kind of thrive. As of now, this IC engine vehicles have taken center stage when it comes to the ride sharing platform, but slowly the transition is happening to EVs, right? Next slide. Yeah. So the key was how do we grow it sustainably, and what are the kind of government backings that's been given, right? So coming from a ride sharing platform, we work under a scheme called Rent a Motorcycle Scheme 1997, which is a central government scheme which is kind of governed by the state, and the interpretations is kind of different from each state to state. And certain states don't even allow the scheme to be implemented altogether. So we've been lobbying around a lot of times with the central government bodies to kind of work a way around it, because we see a lot of potential that can be unlocked with the ride sharing or the micro mobility platforms as such. So with that in mind, sensitizing the bodies that we work around with was the key. So we have been working with RTOs, the STAs, the traffic, police, and henceforth. The other major roadblock that we saw when we were scaling up was the All India permit, which is available readily for, say, for a four-wheeler, but it's not available for a two-wheeler per se, and it is restricted by permits. It was understandable about, say, 10 years back when the scheme was made, or 20 years back, because the CC of vehicles were limited to, say, 100 CC back then. But now the vehicle CC have increased to, say, about 300, 200, 400. And a lot of interstate movements are happening within two-wheelers itself. And that requires a little bit of policy change for it to run smoothly. And this is going to, another gray area is there. There was a specific notification came in, interestingly, last year, kind of portraying this. You need to pay specific road taxes across the border, and you are permitted to cross the border. But that essentially doesn't happen because there is no permits which are available for two-wheeler in 90% of the states in India. So that kind of needs to be addressed as well. Also, one thing is that shared economy is growing. And so two-wheeler rental or any other rental platform are going to heavily rely on an asset-light strategy. And P2P is the way to go. Peer-to-peer lending or managing asset is the way to go. But there is a lot of gray area when it comes to the P2P lending, right? So government has taken a lot of steps. No denying badges are not required anymore for a bike taxi to apply. EVs don't require permits to apply. That is a positive step towards the ride sharing that government has taken in. But a lot of other places, the interference is needed from their end. Next slide, and I'll wrap it up quickly then. Right. So for me, urban mobility landscape looks like this. For me, it's going to be a close integration between smart cities, which is a connected transport infrastructure, smart vehicles, both IC engine and vehicles or any other fuel that it's going to be run by. But smart vehicles is needed for route planning, real-time tracking, transparency, and this can be monetized by all the last mile delivery companies which have been scaling up lately, right? And also cross-sector integration. Like I pointed out in the beginning, people who were running a bike taxi business or a bike rental business have now pivoted to a delivery segment. So all this cross functionality has to happen to effectively utilize the vehicle. And again, it boils down to the sustainability and the revenue part of it. Leveraging data to do better services and build better services and better products and for the future is required. And how do we kind of store and how do we kind of monetize on the data in the coming years is also a interesting topic to be spoken about. With that, I would like to wrap up my presentation. Yes.
Thank you, Dolan. Very interesting. Can we have Mr. Ganesh from Swiggy now, please?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. And it's a great pleasure to be among the esteemed panelists. And the advantage of speaking last is that you become wiser by listening to all the wonderful perspectives shared by the others. So basically, I come from the last mile delivery or the food delivery aggregator business. So ours is basically a gig force which actually delivers products and then the services to the customers in a hyper local way. And there's been a lot of actually discussion around how these players can actually move to EV over a period of time. And then since I've been part of the various panels, Niti Aayog and a few other states, where the discussion is about EV policy is happening, and then I've been fortunate enough to be part of that. So there's quite a lot of learning actually from there, and then a lot of new things that actually we are discussing and how this can enable. So to begin with, what is it that we made an announcement in August, where we made our EV commitment that we will cover 8 lakh kilometers per day through electric vehicles by 2025. And towards that, we ran quite a few pilots in various cities, and then we have an agreement with Reliance BP Mobility to build an EV ecosystem and the battery swapping stations for the delivery partners. And also we have another partnership with Hero Electro, which is it's the leading e-cycle manufacturer and fast dispatch logistics company. And so we basically are looking at how, to enable end-to-end delivery of Swiggy's orders through cargo e-cycles. So the trials are running, and then, sorry. So currently, we are learning from that, and then over a period of the next many months and years, you will see that a lot of the deliveries of food or grocery that you may order will be delivered by an EV, a partner who is using an EV vehicle. So some of the things that, as an observer and as a participant, I have seen that one is, what is the incentivization? This is a question that all of us have been asking in various panels and then various discussions for the policy making. So currently all of us own, an ICE vehicle. So if my motivation to shift to an EV vehicle, there is actually a capital cost to that. So there's a capital, replacement cost. So if is it easy to replace a 70,000-80,000 vehicle with another 1 lakh plus vehicle? So there is a cost to it, and then how many people can afford it, and what is the incentive? So there are a few other models that have come in. People have said you can do a retrofit, and then make your own nice vehicle into that. But these are evolving, and then we have to see the proof of concept that actually is matured. So any mobility solution, from my perspective, especially the EV, both in the 4-wheeler as well as in the 2-wheeler, it has to, the ecosystem has to, develop, and it has to become mature. And then, there should be enough proof of concept, which actually drives people to say, okay, I shift. And then there is definitely an incentive to shift with the fuel prices rising and the cost per kilometer, also going up compared to, a couple of years ago or something. Today it costs more. So there is definitely an incentive. And also the other ecosystem that is around it. I always say, if I have a puncture, if I have a problem with my bike, I just, maybe push it to the next kilometer or a half a kilometer, I'll find somebody to repair it. But is that so in the case of EV? So that is when actually when it becomes ubiquitous, when it becomes very easy to access. You may have solutions where they'll come to your home and, repair it, but that's not there everywhere, maybe in a few metro cities. But by and large, that has to become ubiquitous for everybody to accept. And pandemic has actually driven us to, look towards newer solutions. Like one of the panelists said that, almost it's been a couple of months or 3 months shy of 2 years since we have gone to office, or many of us have gone to office, and then we get everything, groceries, food, everything delivered to home. So we are used to that. So of course, one is actually the fear factor, the other is people not being allowed to go out, etc. So I think when people get used to these services, what happens is you keep accessing, although there may be a small premium to that, but there is the huge ecosystem that drives it. That's where the EV becomes very important. And I see that this is going to get bigger and bigger. I mean, the adoption will get bigger and bigger. Consequently, I hope that the ecosystem also gets better and better, more mature, which will drive people to actually access it and then adopt it. And one of the panelists did say about the kind of support that is needed in terms of policy intervention, in terms of if I have to move, I have 2 bikes. So if I have to, replace one bike with an EV bike, I should have enough incentive. So I may be able to afford it. But for me to say, okay, right from having a charging infrastructure in my apartment block to, having a, servicing infrastructure or battery swapping infrastructure within a few kilometers, I should not spend more than, say, half an hour or something to access that. So these are many of the things. I'm talking from a very metro kind of a situation, because India, a lot of the Indians live beyond the metros in tier 2, tier 3 cities. you need to have similar infrastructure. When say if I actually get shifted from this city to another tier 2 city, I should have similar kind of infrastructure available. So 3 or 4 things are very important. One is there is definitely a need to adopt, and then there is a environment to adopt. But to adopt, there are other things that needed, replacement cost, and which is very critical. That is the big incentive for people to move from this, because one of the things that I always insist in many of the discussion is, in a gig workforce, they come with their own vehicle. Okay, so and he's earning on an average about 20,000 rupees per month. So if he has to replace his mobility device with something that costs 4 or 5 times what he's already invested in, he has to have a lot of motivation, and the ROI has to be so much that he should be able to give himself a push to go and adopt it. That is a very critical element. Second is, these guys who are in the gig force, they run their vehicles a lot more than many of us as individuals do. They would run 125 kilometers a day. That's like 4,000 kilometers or 3,500 kilometers per month. That means his vehicle comes for servicing every 20-25 days. So he needs to have an ecosystem to back that, to service, and then to see to it that he does not have too much of downtime, so that his income earning ability is not impacted. And of course, there are various models that come in, which one of the models I feel is EV aggregators could be a very critical element in this interim period before people buy EV on their own, where people have a aggregate, and then they invest in EV vehicles, and then they are available in many places across the city. If I'm a gig force worker, I get my ICE vehicle to the point, park it there, take the EV vehicle, and then go across, do my income earning activity, come back and then park it there, and then take my ICE vehicle back home. So that way I'm optimizing the whole thing. Whereas my major work is done on EV, and I don't need to invest on an EV vehicle. I have an access to that to use it for my income earning. I am actually doing a sustainable activity, which also is very sustainable for the environment. And at the same time, I am not immediately forced to actually spend capital to adopt a thing. So over a period of time, maybe over a period of 2-3 years, when I have made enough income and then have put away some savings, then I can adopt. Very innovative solutions need to come. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are looking at innovative solutions, and these are being discussed. So these are my thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. It was very informative. I would now want to sort of summarize what we have heard so far. It is very heartening to see that we are speaking about bottom of the pyramid in terms of the commercial operators, people who use two-wheelers for delivery. We're also talking about mass mobility, talking about bus transportation. I think the major takeaway would be that sustainability is going to be the name of the game going forward. And another very important aspect which was highlighted was the idea of mass adoption. I think mass adoption is also very crucial going forward for a country like India. And of course, the policies. I think the next few years, we're going to see a massive change in the policies that were spoken about by various panelists. Some of these policies, to my mind, are the idea of, the whole idea of bringing in one nation, one tax is also going to sort of play a key role in the urban mobility sector as well. Because taxation regimes like the GST have probably not the best of times to have been adopted, but looks like that's the way forward. But having said that, I also wanted to take a small, we want to understand the take back for the various panelists. If there's one line, if you would like to say about the future, we want a comprehensive answer from all of you. So in the same order, or we could start in the reverse order. If you would give us in one line what the future looks like, I think that will be great.
You want me to go first, Rajaram?
Yes, sir. Yes, in the reverse order. So starting with Ganesh, sir.
I feel in one line, is actually developing the ecosystem to enable more adoption, having enabling policies which actually also drive the adoption. And thirdly, the most important thing is these things will be our small contribution to Mother Earth and the sustainability, and this is what we leave for the future generations, given the various climatic changes that we are seeing. Thank you.
Thank you. Dolan.
Yeah. So for me, it's going to be shared, to be very honest. Like if I have to put it in one word, it's going to be shared. The urban mobility is going to be shared. And the ownership patterns are changing, let's face it. And that's where I see a lot of adoption of EV, a lot of adoption of other probably sustainable fuel running vehicles. And it's going to be shared. And like Mr. Ganesh pointed out before, a lot of innovative thinking and around this space is already happening, and I've thankfully been part of it as well. And I can assure you, things are coming into fruition very soon.
Thank you. Before we go to Mr. Ravi, we would like the participants to ask any questions. Please feel free to drop any questions, and we'll be happy to take them up. Over to Mr. Ravi.
Yeah, thank you. So actually, it has always been shared. So I wanted to respond to some of the other panelists that it is going to be shared in the future. It has always been shared. It's just that there is a technology layer added on top. Two types of technology. One is the vehicle technology itself, which has moved from combustion engines to electric powered engines. And then the technology on which the shared mobility is earlier used to go onto the street to get an auto. Now you can book it on the mobile. So you are changing the platform on which you are booking it, but primarily India has always been a shared economy and it will continue to be. So the future will be the same. It's just that there will be newer technologies coming in, only the context will vary. So the future, for us to be future proof, we need to harness what is already existing and build the capability to address the future. The future technology needs. So another point I would like to mention, more in response to the others, is that we have 3 out of 4 panelists talking about the technology. So, but if you look at the actual share of trips, they have it has always been almost like a pure market play. The taxi, the Uber, Ola, taxi, and the regular thing. But still, they were only able to cater to 1 to 2% of all the trips. So if you see the thing is that the actual ridership numbers public domain, so we don't know. But from what we see in newspaper articles, just BMTC carries equal number of people as much as Uber carries across the country. Okay, so despite 6 years of continuous growth, and that's the volume they are able to cater, because it's a premium set of audience who pay 8 rupees, 12 rupees, 20 rupees per kilometer. So we need to also be a bit realistic while we think about the future. It's not like, on one hand, the industry wants us to believe that will take over everything. On the other hand, government thinks that whatever exists is a big evil and that will kill the public transport. The reality is somewhere in the middle. And that's why we need more people working on the space, actually. So on one hand, the government thinks that, rented two-wheeler is such a bad thing that will kill public transport. No, it won't, because it's still a premium vehicle only. But you need to make a regulation in a way that it caters to its demand market and not poach into the other markets. But that level of granularity is missing in the debates. We are either at one extreme or the other extreme.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you. Yeah, Roshan.
So I think I agree with all the 3 panelists, but I think the layer that sort of encompasses all the 3 panelists and what they have to say is the data. The data will drive improve efficiency, will enable accessibility, without which it just becomes people have choice right now, so they are moving to different places. So unless the future of mobility is digital, it is the connected, autonomous, and without that I think it may not be possible to have more sustainable mode. So if you want to look at sustainability, of course, you have to have, a digital way of doing things. That's about it.
Yeah. Thank you, Roshan. Thank you, everyone. Couple of more thoughts I thought I wanted to share was apart from sustainability, I see a large scale traction from the industry, from various organizations towards the government asking for certain reforms. I think there's a fit case for reforms in the mobility sector, and it's high time because I've been associated with this sector for the last 2.5 years. From what I have seen, like as rightfully pointed out, there has been a requirement for large scale adoption of mobility going forward. That's going to be the way things are going to be. Also, with regard to electric vehicle adoption, I think the large fleet aggregators have a huge role to play. With many of the organizations now going towards a lesser carbon footprint scenario, I think the country needs to come up with more systems, process, and laws to regulate them around themes like sustainability. And I think it's been a great panel, and it's been great listening to all of you. As far as we can see, I think we are at 3 o'clock and we have ended on the dot. So thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Stay
Thank you,
safe.
sir. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful session. We hope to have you back next year offline as well. So thank you, the attendees. Please stay tuned. We have one more session coming up.
Thank you.
And it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.